Speaking of legacy of wisdom, I want to dedicate this talk to my mother, 92 years old, because I stand on her broad shoulders. We all know that we are living in extraordinary times. But did you know that someone is waiting? Someone is waiting just for you. Waiting for you to lift your voice. In fact, we all know women all over the globe who are lifting their voice, who are rising up for such a time as this. I'd like to share a brief video with you. Take a look. Yes, we are those women. We are here. We are here. Now, I didn't always understand many of the things that I'm going to share with you today. When I was a little girl, I was living in rural Mississippi, and I didn't know that I was living in an all-black town. I didn't know the meaning of segregation. And though I didn't have words for it at the time, I was ashamed. Because when my family went to town, we had to drink from the water fountain that said colored. We had to go through the back door of the shops. We had to call the shopkeepers Mr. and Mrs., even though they called my parents by their first names. And though I didn't have words for it, I felt that in my gut. And I remember making a declaration. My mom said I put my hands on my hips. And I said, someday I'm going to make it impossible for anybody to prejudge me, my parents, my sisters, or anyone else simply because of the color of our skin. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment of awareness and setting my intention was a moment of empowerment, a moment of finding my voice, a moment of leadership. Financially, my family was very poor, but I didn't know it. We always had food on the table. In fact, my mom's table was called the welcome table because everybody was welcome there. Everybody belonged up in there. And my mom would use her superpowers to transform our usual meal of cornbread and buttermilk to buttermilk and cornbread. When I was 9 years old, we lived in a very rough neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan. I remember seeing somebody get stabbed to death outside of my house. By the time I was 12 years old, we'd moved about 10 times. But several times a year, we'd go back home, back to Mississippi. And I remember the day before, my mother would spend that whole day frying chicken. Because we would not be able to eat during that 18-hour drive because no restaurant would serve us along the way. Can you imagine 3 little kids? When do we get there? And they're hungry too. We'd have to wait until we got to my grandfather's house. Now, we always left right around midnight under the cover of darkness so that the police wouldn't stop us for a DWB. That's driving while black. Now, as I look back, I am actually grateful for all of these moments, all of these experiences, because they've made me who I am as a human being, as a parent, as a community steward. I'm grateful because all of these moments have shaped me, have formed me, and they help me make the world a little bit better off than the way I found it. I'm grateful because all of these moments, these experiences qualify me. They qualify me to have my seat at the table. Now, I am qualified not because I have a PhD and 1, 2, 3, 4 other college degrees. I am qualified not because I was the first African American woman to become the highest executive in the IT industry. I'm qualified not because I'm an award-winning author and poet. I'm qualified not because of what people think of me or what they project onto me. I am qualified just because. Just because. And here's some more good news. So are you. You're qualified too. Yes. Just like the women we saw in that video, just like the women we saw in the video that Elaine showed us earlier today. Someone is waiting for you to show up, to bring your particular voice that exists nowhere else at the table. There are over 8 billion people on the planet, and each one of us has a unique fingerprint, a unique footprint, and a unique voice print. And if you don't bring it, if you don't bring your voice, your particular voice for this moment in time, your perspective, your special genius, who will? The world will not have it. In our interconnected global village, we want you to show up. We want you to show up and lift your voice. And you've heard about these qualities throughout the conference. We want you to show up with humility and respect, generosity, love, compassion, integrity, gratitude. We want you to show up with faithfulness, with artistry, with perseverance. We want you to show up with vulnerability. The kind of vulnerability that it takes to get out of your comfort zone and take a deep dive into your learning zone, into your creative zone. Let's talk about vulnerability. Years ago, at the WIN Geneva Conference, 2005, I met a woman at one of our WIN networking lunches. Hi, I'm Kanji from South Africa. You know how with some people you just kind of have that click? Well, that's how it was with me and Kanji. And I remember going up to the conference desk the next day to ask about her. And they said, oh, well, she had to leave early, but she left an envelope for you. Well, inside that envelope was a lovely handwritten note. Next August, I'm hosting a tribute to honor the 50th anniversary of the South African Women's March on the Parliament buildings in Pretoria. I want you to be our opening speaker. Her Excellency Dr. Kanji Sabati, South African Ambassador to Switzerland. You just never know who you're sitting next to. I'm just saying. So now I'm Googling her and learning all about her awesome work. And then I called her. Well, yes, I'd love to, but I have just one question. Why me? Why me? Oh, Gloria. When I heard you share your stories about growing up in Mississippi, I thought you'd grown up under apartheid. Are you sure you're not from South Africa? That next summer, I sat on the dais with Dr. Ruth Mampati, one of the co-organizers of that historic march. Dr. Ruth, what gave you the courage to push back against the white Dutch Boer government all those years ago? Well, she stood up and she put her hands on her hips and her neck started doing one of these. Dr. Burgess, it did not take courage. We galvanized 100,000 women, blacks, Afrikaners, coloreds, white, from all over the world. We stood up because we were mothers. And we did not want our children to suffer the dehumanization that we suffered. Step by step, brick by brick, these women began to dismantle, began to tear down the walls of apartheid. June Jordan, social activist and celebrated African-American scholar and poet, wrote a rousing tribute to these women, a tribute that she eloquently calls a poem for South African women. And this poem ends with these words: we are the ones. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Many years later, the women of Sweet Honey in the Rock, y'all know that group? Yes, Sweet Honey in the Rock, created a song, an anthem, using those last few words of Jordan's poem. And they called their song, We Are the Ones.